Welcome to the Creative Condition podcast with me, Ben Talon, illustrator and creativity coach, founder of the Creative Condition, artist and writer. I bring 20 years of creative industry experience and a lifelong love of creativity, a fundamental pillar of human happiness, to you through ongoing personal exploration and the shared experiences of others. You'll get a nourishing mix of creative industry professionals and people far and wide using creativity in ways that can take our learning to the next level so we can maximise our unique blend. The show has been supported from day one by Illustration X, a tremendous illustration agency representing a shining global roster of illustrators and animators over at illustrationx.com. The music for the show is by Dirty Freud, who you can listen to now on all good streaming services. And for everything else, for my coaching, resources and inspiration, head to thecreativecondition.com.
In partnership with patients, you kind of have to be creative to come up with solutions, right? Or ways to improve a situation, which may not always be obvious. So, you do need to be innovative and think what else can we do here to make your life better? So I think actually we do it every day.
Today I'm joined by Rageshri Dhairyawan, author of Unheard, The Medical Practice of Silencing. It's a tremendous book, and I wanted to talk to Rageshri about deep listening, the importance of that in creativity. Rageshri's background is that she's an NHS consultant in sexual health and HIV medicine. She's based in London, and she was unheard herself when she was suffering endometriosis. This led to a line of inquiry in her writing about why certain people are unheard in the medical practice, in the healthcare system. We're going to get into that. We're also going to get into what that means for creativity and the human condition. This is the Creative Condition podcast. Hello, how are you doing, guys? My name is Ben Talon. I am the host of the Creative Condition podcast. How are you doing? I hope everything is well. We're getting a little sunshine here in the UK. The birds are singing. Spring is just around the corner, or maybe it's even here. How are you? I've been a bit muddled today. I'm not going to lie. It's been a strange Monday. Do you know one of those Mondays when you're lethargic and slightly downbeat, maybe even melancholy a little bit, and it's hard to get going? That's how I felt today. I've been a little bit scatterbrained. I'm recording this later than I should. I've been, I've been all over the place. I'm not going to lie. So it happens. And this is something that comes up in the coaching I've been doing recently with clients, people not feeling their best self. And it's very hard to diagnose what that means and how we get into that, but that's why it's such an individual process that I love. But it's also really hard to turn on yourself to find the answers. My poor wife, Laura, are you all right? You look knackered. You don't seem with it today. And I'm not. And it impacts creativity. It's something that I've been writing about recently. I've been bothered by AI, particularly the environmental impacts of it. A close second, of course, is the impact on the world of illustration, which has been my breadwinner for nearly 18 years now. And it's without doubt having an effect because of the ubiquity of free/really affordable, high-quality imagery. It was always going to have that knock-on effect. And whether it's a kind of direct mugging, I know that some of my work has been scraped. I'm not going to get into that down that rabbit hole today. But more importantly, I think it's the fact that there's already a lot of fear around commissioning illustration because it's seen as something of a wild card or risky. Therefore, clients are maybe more reluctant than before to sign off on illustration. And with the ubiquity now of alternate imagery and, clients sending agencies AI images going, we want this. Something that Dave Palmer, a few episodes ago from Love Creative, talked about being a problem from their side of things, an opportunity and a problem. So go back and listen to that if you get a chance. But anyway, I could go off and ramble at you all today, but I don't want to do that. I'm feeling tired. Not my best self today, but I think it's good to acknowledge that. It's good to be open about it. If that's the case for you and you feel some benefit potentially from this coaching, from the pit stop, there's a week to go in March, which means a week to get it at the cheaper rate of £400 for a pit stop session where we go through all of your makeup of creativity in an intensive one-to-one session. I've been loving doing those so far this year. I've got free slots at the moment, so get in touch if you want to book on. It is going to go up to, I think, £600 after this because it is such an intensive process and it takes me so long to go back and write up the notes and do that properly. Some people have been getting 20 pages of recommendations and action points and exercises, and it really is fully blown audit. So if that sounds of interest to you, jump on while there's still an offer by the end of March. But dare I say it, I still think there's great value after that. So if you miss the boat, then get in touch. Always happy to stagger payments, work things out, do it that way around. So give me a shout. Right, Rageshri Dhairyawan, today's guest on the podcast. Rageshri is a doctor, researcher and author. She is an NHS consultant in sexual health and HIV medicine based in London. Her clinical work, research, writing and advocacy focus on improving health equity, and she is a sought-after speaker on this topic. Rageshri's own experiences of being unheard as a patient and her work with minoritised communities have inspired her to speak up about injustice in healthcare. And Rageshri is the author of Unheard, the medical practice of silencing, which is what I want to get into today. Why is listening so important? Why don't we listen as well as we should? What happened to that family-doctor dynamic? What has Rageshri learned in the healthcare? And how can we apply that to creativity and get into that? So, you know, we've all had that experiences. I think people who work in agencies I speak to are very rushed. They're very under siege with their client projects. Sometimes they feel like there's not an open dialogue around creativity and risk taking. So we're going to get into that. It's a fascinating chat. Rageshri was absolutely wonderful. Big thank you to the founding sponsor of the show, Illustration X. They've been here since day one, 10 years ago. Check out their wonderful global range of illustration and animation portfolios now. If you want the best in bespoke, custom art, whether it's motion or still, that's where they are. They do live, motion, fashion, editorial, bespoke commissions, you name it, they do it. illustrationx.com. Right, enough waffling from me. Thecreativecondition.com, by the way, for the pit stop and all of that other good stuff and all the resources, the reading list and the likes. I hope you enjoy the show. Let me know your thoughts. Here I am with Rageshri Dhairyawan.
Yeah, so I was born in Bombay, and I lived there till I was 2. And me and my family lived in this kind of 6-story building in Bombay, which was built by my uncle on a plot of land, which has been in my dad's family for generations. So I grew up with loads of cousins, which was fantastic. And then moved when I was 2 to Essex, which is where I grew up. But every summer we'd go back to Bombay, and like my cousins from all over the world would come back at the same time. So it was really fun to go and have summers there. And yeah, I grew up as an Essex girl, which was really great. And then went to uni in London, and I've been in London ever since. My parents didn't have a camera at that point, so there's very few photos of that time. I think one of my aunts shared some that she had, so it's really weird to see photos of me as a baby because there's been so few. So I can't picture that, obviously, but yeah, I think having gone back most summers as a child, obviously very familiar with the place and can kind of imagine what it was like, but yeah, I can't remember it.
Yeah. And any standout traits? Like, were you a sensitive kid? Were you a playful kid? Well, I'm always interested in that thread.
I think my family would describe me as being quite naughty, so
Nice.
like to get into trouble, but I was very good at school, so I could be well behaved when I wanted to. And I was very much a bookworm. I used to read all the time. And when I was growing up in Essex, we lived like 5 minutes walk from a library. So my mum used to take us every Saturday and spend time there every week. So, you know, she really instilled that love of reading. But I was also a gymnast as well, so I was doing cartwheels everywhere.
Interesting. And tell us a little bit about your role today, if you don't mind. And then I'd love to just dig into the origins of your book, which is wonderful.
So at the moment, I'm a consultant in sexual health and HIV medicine in East London. I've been a doctor for 20 years and in this specialty for about 16. So kind of my day-to-day work is doing HIV clinics, looking after patients with HIV on the ward. And I also have a day a week of research where I get to carry out some research studies and collaborate with other academics, which is really cool. And I've got a few voluntary roles as well. So I work with some patient organisations. So, for example, I work with 4M, which is a small charity run by African migrant women living with HIV who provide peer support to women on their pregnancy journey if they have HIV as well. So it's really nice to do some of that voluntary work as well on the side. So yeah, it's quite varied, and I think it's a specialty I kind of fell into, but it's one that's provided lots of opportunities to do some really fun things that I never thought I'd get to do.
And what was it that drew you to the medical profession?
So very boringly, I guess, for an Indian kid, there's a lot of doctors in the family. My mum is a retired doctor. My sister is one. My brother-in-law is one. My dad is a dentist. So, he was kind of the outsider in our family, just looking after teeth. And I think when I was a teenager, I was really interested in research. And I remember someone saying to me that if you wanted to go far in research, then you should be a doctor first. So I was like, yeah, I'll just be a doctor first, without really thinking about what that meant. Um, but for me, I think I've enjoyed the clinical side of it more than the research, although I love doing that as well. But I'm very, lucky, I think, to have landed in a profession that I enjoy.
And do you have the freedom to follow your own curiosity and personality when it comes to the research? Because it's something that I help other creatives through my coaching to try and join the dots between just the things they do in their free time, the things that they care about and are drawn towards emotionally, perhaps. Is that the case? And do you have that freedom?
I do to an extent. So often kind of the issues that I see come up on the ward or in clinical practice, I kind of think, has anyone looked at this? And then I work in a really fantastic research centre called the Share Collaborative, which is all about achieving health equity. So working with very like-minded people and, thinking about how can we answer this question. And then, often then being able to apply for a grant. So I feel there is a lot of freedom. But I'm also lucky to have collaborated with people outside of the medical profession. So, I've worked with philosophers and anthropologists and historians to kind of look at that other side of medicine, which has been really interesting as well. And sometimes collaboration is a bit easier because, you're not applying for the grant, you're helping out. So, yeah, I think there is a lot of freedom there, but obviously you also have to have some grant money. So there is the obligation to apply for things that will give you money to have that academic time.
Of course. And I came across Unheard, as I mentioned to you, when I first got in touch through Yasmin Ali, who had on the show and absolutely loved her book, Power Up. And I know you guys are part of a writing group, which is fantastic. I'm interested in the seed of that idea that became Unheard, because it's a tremendous book. And the moment I saw the cover, I was in. I saw it on Yasmin's stories on her Instagram account, and there's multiple reasons why I was interested. I'm just fascinated by the human condition for starters, and I see an absence of real listening in our society today for myriad reasons. But also on a personal level, I have family members who are ill more than I'd like them to be, and I often find myself frustrated that they're not being asked the right questions in terms of lifestyle and of sensitivity and neurodiversity and this kind of stuff. So my antennae went up straight away, and I absolutely loved the book. It's so entertaining, but just so informative and human and warm. So tell us about the origins of that.
Oh, thank you very much. So I've always been very interested in health inequalities through my clinical work and my research, and kind of being aware that many of the patients I've worked with in East London over the years are people who have a voice, but no one is really listening to them. They're not really seen in government policy, or, there's no real focus on them. So thinking, who is listening to them? But it really came from a personal experience of mine, which was, about 12 years ago now. I was admitted to hospital during an IVF cycle with really excruciating abdominal pain, and I'd had my eggs collected the day before, so I knew it was painful from my previous experiences, but this was like nothing I'd had before. So I was admitted to hospital. And the worry was I had a surgical complication, so something called ovarian torsion, where, if you don't have surgery very quickly, your ovary can die and it's very painful. So they took me very seriously when I went to hospital. A&E admitted me, gave me lots of pain relief, which was good. And luckily for me, the scan didn't show that I needed surgery. And the medical team felt, my pain was because of all the hormones I've had, really making a condition I had called endometriosis worse. And endometriosis is a very common condition associated with periods, which mean they're very painful. So, again, used to pain, but this hormonal treatment was making it, like the worst episode of endometriosis pain I'd ever had. And when I was on the ward, because I didn't have, a serious surgical condition, I was kind of treated by the staff as being a bit of a nuisance, kind of, why are you still here? And I was still there because I needed pain relief. So when I asked for more pain relief, I was often denied it. or was dismissed and said, you're going to have to wait. I could feel them, almost rolling their eyes at me. I felt like I was being treated like I was, lying or an unreliable narrator. And that was quite shocking for me at the time. I'd never been admitted to hospital, and just realizing how vulnerable you are literally um, vulnerable to the care that you get. So it's important that you get good care. And I wasn't able to kind of complain or advocate for myself. I had to rely on my husband, and, thank goodness he was there. And when I went home a few days later, again, I didn't complain, and I kind of wondered why haven't you complained? And I think I just didn't want to be seen as more of a nuisance. Um, and I just wanted to forget about it. And it was that kind of silence. I felt I'd been silenced that made me really think, um, if this can happen to me, what happens to other women in my position? Because, I'm coming from an area of great privilege. I was at that point a new consultant, so senior doctor in the NHS, can speak English. I didn't have a life-threatening condition, and that happened to me. So what happens to everyone else? And I think kind of not talking about it for so long and not complaining, I started to feel really guilty and ashamed of why I was staying so silent. And it took a few years, but I started to talk about it and eventually started to write about it. And that's what became the book. And I guess the other thing to say is I'm a doctor, and I was really curious to understand why, even with my own best intentions, I don't always listen as well as I can to patients. I really wanted to explore what that was. And I'm very aware there's a lot of doctor narratives out there when we come from a very specific perspective. But what I was trying to do is to come at it from my experience as a patient as well, while also recognizing I'm not a typical patient because I'm a doctor.
Well, yeah, which gives you unique insights and the perfect position to write such a book. And I think bravo for doing so, because this will, I hope, help a lot of people who've suffered that same experience, albeit in different circumstances, make them feel more heard and give them something to rally behind, because books are a wonderful medium for that. Have you found, in terms of the response to the book, anything along those lines? Have people reached out to you? Has that feedback been positive?
Yeah, I was a bit I was a bit anxious when it came out. I thought, I wasn't sure it was going to be well received, and actually it's been great. It's been received really well by healthcare professionals. I was worried they'd think I was writing a book that was blaming them for not listening, but actually, lots of people have had it happen to them and acknowledge that this is an issue that does need addressing. I've had people who've had experiences as patients reach out to me and tell me about their experiences, which has obviously been, a great privilege to hear their stories. And I've heard people, take the book with them to their doctors, which I kind of think is really cool.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So it has. I've had a really good reception. And I'm kind of trying to do a variety, reach a variety of audiences. So, I did a webinar for the Patients Association and things, just to kind of raise awareness of what we can do.
Well, that's the thing. I think at the core of this, despite the context of healthcare, I dare say it's a bigger issue. We live in such a fast-paced world now where people are really struggling to get by financially. There's so much noise and so much, dramatic news out there that I think so many people feel unheard. And real listening and community spaces are kind of impoverished at the moment. And I feel, and in terms of experiences, like my wife and I had 2 rounds of IVF, and Laura suffers endometriosis too, which was I learned a lot through that experience about the condition. And it was horrible seeing her. I remember getting off a train in London once, and she was doubled over on the platform in excruciating pain, and she's tough. So that, I knew how bad that was. And very interesting, actually, that you mentioned in the book about the funding model and the kind of the inequalities, would that be the right word? In that, as in perhaps the people in funding and not the people who've lived through such an experience, which is a exclusively female condition.
Yeah, I think, so I try to look at silencing at more of a systematic level as well. So, for example, with endometriosis, I think we have really big gaps in our knowledge about it. So just I'm very sorry to hear about your wife as well, that she has it too. But yeah, so, I can remember going to a conference which was for patients, and having sat through the sessions that day, I realized, we don't know what causes endometriosis. the only diagnostic tool we have is surgery. We don't really have effective treatments. We don't know how it causes infertility. Like there's so many gaps in our knowledge. And, through my research, I got to understand that it's because of, women historically as a patient group have been silenced. So over the centuries, they've had their concerns about their painful periods dismissed as being normal. And what that's meant is that, doctors and researchers who have traditionally been male have not put focus onto painful periods as a condition, and the research hasn't been done over the years. And it's only, more recently now that we have more female physicians, female researchers who might be taking this on more and really looking into these conditions that predominantly affect women. So yeah, that kind of silencing, I think, of women as a group, as patients being unheard, and also the fewer kind of researchers and doctors we have there who, will really try to focus on endometriosis and women's conditions until recently has been low. So, we need to amplify all those voices.
And the warmth and the humility with which you write is brilliant. And going back to what you said about this, the valid concern that you would upset people in your industry. I didn't take that from the book at all, and therefore you hope that people who care as much as you about your profession, might just have been unaware for, like you said, maybe systemic reasons that exclude them also, unbeknownst to them. And the hope is that people will kind of get this and realize, and it will, provoke the right kind of change, I think.
I really hope so too. And, it's so interesting. I've spoken to lots of other female doctors who have felt unheard as patients, but also unheard in their profession. So, that even though, we have lots of female doctors now and in senior positions as well, there's still the thing about walking on the ward and being assumed that you're not the consultant or you're not the doctor, due to, stereotypes of what doctors look like. So I think, those feelings of being unheard in the profession as well, I think that's resonated with people as well as their experiences of being patients.
And when we talk about listening, this is obviously goes deeper than simply hearing the words, doesn't it? It's about body language and instinct, which I think he was. I'm halfway through A Fortunate Woman, for the back of learning about that through your book, which is brilliant also. And I think it was in there which you mentioned that there's quite a high percentage of female doctors now, but that disconnect between that and the kind of the power players, if that's the right term, is an interesting one. But that listening, I also read, there's a brilliant book called Sensitive by Jen Granneman, and it's about highly sensitive people, and it's incredible. I'm very much one of those, a total empath. And, there's downsides to that, and just having to learn to manage them. But I've always been quite attuned with that, with body language, with instinctive interpretation of a person's words, that what they might really be saying. And I've always been willing to dig deeper, particularly with friends and people in my profession. And it's why I love the coaching work. And there's a brilliant story Jen tells in that book about a nurse, and she's quite low down on the hierarchy. I can't remember the term, the job title, but she keeps trying to voice a concern about a patient who she's been told is signed off after an operation as being okay, and she has a niggling feeling and she can't quite place why that something isn't right here. She finally manages to get someone to listen to her, and when they go back and do more tests, it turns out there was something that might have killed her that same day had they not gone back in and done further work. So I guess my question is, is there a growing belief in the efficacy of instinct and sensitivity and these traits that are very difficult to put in a spreadsheet and quantify, but I believe as a part of the human condition are absolutely vital?
Yes, I think there is. So I think when you're at medical school, you're kind of learn communication skills, which is obviously important, but it's a very formulaic fashion. So you learn how to take a medical history, which has its set sections in a certain order. And I think actually as medical students, you're very good at listening because you just want to hear everything the patient is saying, as everything is interesting. But then you learn that, in clinical practice, you're not going to have much time. So, you have to really dig out what you think are the most pertinent factors from that patient's history that will be useful for you to make a diagnosis and treat the patient. But they're not often the same things as what the patient wants to tell you. So the things that are important to the patient may not be the things that you are important. So you may not listen to those bits, or you may interrupt the patient. And I think when you get into clinical practice, you start to really learn what is more the art of medicine, which is kind of, you get to that's when you learn your instinct. I think instinct actually comes from clinical practice, and years of experience listening to patients. As a consultant, I've obviously been a doctor for a long time. I know all my medical knowledge in my specialty, but quite often we use our guts, because we've seen this before. We've seen a similar pattern before, or if we haven't, our colleagues have. So we can say, this patient looks sick, the may perhaps their blood pressure and heart rate and everything looks okay, their blood tests are okay, but I think they look really sick. And quite often, you may find out within 24 hours they've deteriorated for whatever reason. So I think actually that instinct is really important, but I think it comes from practice, and that in that practice you have to be reflective as a doctor. And I think we are hopefully becoming slightly more increasingly reflective of thinking about, what went well, what didn't go well. And that really helps us, develop that instinct. And I think it's what brings the humanity to medicine, isn't it? It's that's why AI is not going to replace doctors, I believe, because it's knowing, what to ask, when to ask it, when to listen, which bits are important to listen to. All of that comes from practice and is a very human practice.
Absolutely. And I think that's what's beautiful about the Fortunate Woman, is that, and you mentioned this quite extensively in the book, is that kind of loss of the family doctor. And I remember it very well from being a kid. It was Dr. Thorburn. I remember his name. It was very much passed down generations. And there's something beautiful about that there's that capacity to pick up on nuance and intergenerational detail also, which is, very important, isn't it? Because, God, I had a shocking night's sleep last night because I've got an overthinking brain, and I tend to worry too much sometimes. And usually I'm good at managing that. Last night was a bit of a lapse in that one. And yet, my mother has the same brain. My dad's got aspects of the same brain. I've recently seen that in my brother too. And it's so that consistency is really important, isn't it?
Definitely. And I think, that's one of the things I call for in the book is how can we increase continuity of care? Because certainly policies have been trying to get rid of it for a while. And, as a doctor, it's really nice for me to see the same person again and again, because when you start the consultation, you're not starting from scratch. You already know kind of how best to communicate with each other. There might be a degree of trust there already. You can ask, how was your holiday? You've been on holiday since I last saw you. How, what else has been going on with you? And it just makes the consultation much more humane. But actually, lots of studies have found that, if you see, for example, the same family doctor, it reduces emergency admissions to hospital. It results in much safer healthcare and more efficient healthcare. And I think the bit that often we forget about is actually it's just kind of more enjoyable. Certainly, I think as patients, it might be nice to see the same person, but as a doctor, it's really nice for us to develop those relationships over time. So, I do call for more continuity of care and think about how we might be able to promote that.
And there's a beautiful analogy in A Fortunate Woman where she says that to treat a patient only as a condition would be to treat a book only as the paper that is written on in the ink, And I thought, wow, that was, as a writer, that was, that's fantastic. So, but it's absolutely right, isn't it? And particularly now with the kind of sharpening class divide, I guess as someone from a working class background, it's really important because the people, particularly from working class backgrounds, I think, and marginalized demographics, are unheard right across the board. And have you observed what happens to people when they are consistently unheard? And the flip side of that, is there a rejuvenation there when they do suddenly get the sense they're being listened to?
Yeah, so I think unfortunately it's all too common, and I think we see it a lot in patient safety reports where, they look at why something bad has happened, and it's often that the patient has said there's something wrong with them, and they've been told, I think you're okay, and then something bad has happened, sadly. So lots of people report having been unheard, dismissed, even gaslit in healthcare. And this can have real impacts on health. So it may lead to delayed investigations, diagnosis, and treatments. It may lead to a lack of trust in the doctor-patient relationship, because why would you trust your doctor if they're not really taking anything you're saying seriously? And it can lead to healthcare avoidance as well, because again, why would you go back to that doctor if they're not going to take you seriously? So I think that has real impacts on physical health. It can have impacts on mental health. Again, you may start to doubt your own body, even though you are the expert in your body. It's your body, you know it best. So yeah, I think it can have huge impacts. And the other thing it can do is it can silence patients. So, if you're going back to your doctor and you're saying, I'm worried, for example, about the side effects of this tablet, and they say it's fine, just get on with it. You might just stop telling them what's going on. And that's really bad as well, because we as doctors want to know as much as we can from patients. It really helps us know what's going on and make a management plan with them. So if patients don't feel they can talk to us, if we're silencing them, then it's really bad for their care.
In terms of, creativity itself, it's funny, it's not something, because I have friends who are doctors, and it's the general reaction I seem to get is kind of, well, no, my job isn't creative. But I think that comes down to the kind of ongoing misinterpretation of the term creative. I think people lump it straight into the artistry basket, which is really valid. That's something I'd like to ask you about in a moment. But really, I use the Sir Ken Robinson definition of creativity, which is the ability to have ideas that have value. And I think that goes back to your definition of instinct, which is the basis of training and, dare I say, craft and the knowledge of your tools, then joining the dots with an individual's circumstances to make that connection. And those kind of connections, that really is at the core of what I interpret creativity to be. So I think there is space for imagination and for innovation and all these components of creativity. Is that something you go along with?
Yeah, definitely. And I was just thinking, sometimes in partnership with patients, you kind of have to be creative to come up with solutions, right? Or ways to improve a situation, which may not always be obvious. So, you do need to be innovative and think what else can we do here to make your life better? So I think actually we do it every day.
No, that's music to my ears, and I see it all the time. I see it in any roles. That's one of my big battles with all this work around the creative condition, is just to kind of get everyone switched on to the fact that by default, being human, we are creative. It's just that some people are more predisposed to artistry, and that's the sort of glorification bit that people then get. They go then believe they're not creative because they just assume it's only that. But that said, you mentioned artistic expression in the book, which I was delighted to see, and the value of that kind of exploration through other mediums. Is that something that do you take joy from the arts? Is that something that you kind of apply in your own work?
Yeah, so this is where I get to say I've got an A level in art, which I don't. I have a qualification. No, I used to love art, and I don't get the time to paint anymore as much as I used to. But yeah, it does come up in work. So, for example, this summer there is going to be an exhibition at the Whitechapel Gallery by a South Asian artist called Hamad Butt, who sadly died of HIV in the 90s, and they're displaying some of his work, which is very much around his HIV diagnosis. And we're collaborating with the curator there to try and create some engagement kind of, panels and events for the public. So getting to, work with the Whitechapel Gallery and the creative art academics in my role as an HIV doctor is really exciting. And, I'm really interested to see what happens. And there's been other opportunities as well. So I am on the medical board of a sexual health charity for people of colour called NAS. And it applied for an innovation fund. And basically, one of the people working for NAS is a filmmaker, and we basically got funding to make a film, which is about raising HIV awareness in African communities. But it is, a film with a story. So I was part of the kind of the writing group in terms of thinking about what we wanted to highlight in the stories. But then it was filmed in my clinic, and they said on the day, can you be an extra? We need someone to play a doctor. So I'm kind of on camera playing a doctor with my name for like a minute. And I now have an IMDb page as an actress. Because, that kind of stuff is so cool.
That's awesome. I love that.
Yeah, so it comes in random ways, and it's really nice.
That's really great. I did a recent episode with Caroline Christie, who's a content designer, and she got fascinated with this topic of kind of cross-pollination of fields, and specifically honed in on it was when AT&T, at the time the largest telecommunications company in America, this was around the 60s, they've funded two research arms called Bell Labs and EAT, which was Experiments in Arts and Technology. And they brought in Andy Warhol and a number of other the prominent artists of the time and put them with engineers and all these other kind of professions in a massive project. And that through various channels, I think they would play the part in creating the Pixel, many of the technologies we know today. And I love that. I really think that with the problems we face in the world today, everything from the climate to biodiversity and many other things, even, the work that you've been doing, I think that there's overlooked and infinite value to getting the different kind of minds together to look at problems from a different angle. I think that it's something you kind of allude to with your own championing of the arts in your book. I'd love to see more of that, and I'm sure you would.
Absolutely love it. I have to say there's a collaboration coming up soon as well with some fashion students from Central St. Martin. So I think, it's I agree. Bringing in different ideas, different ways of visualizing issues and solutions is increasingly important.
I loved to learn about the germ theory. Is it Ignaz Semmelweis? You tell us a little bit about that if you could. That was fascinating to me.
So I'd never heard of Semmelweis, who was a Hungarian physician who basically is known as the savior of mothers. So he was a doctor working in Austria, and he was trying to work out why in one part of the hospital mothers were dying more frequently than in the other part, and basically they were dying more frequently in kind of the unit that was led by doctors rather than in the midwife-led unit. So using statistical techniques that were new at the time, he basically worked out that because the doctors were doing autopsies and they weren't wearing gloves, they were passing on some kind of substance, and at that point germs weren't known about, so we didn't know about germ theory. He thought there was something that was coming from these dead bodies that was being transferred to the women and causing them to become unwell and to die. And so what he suggested was that doctors should wash their hands, and that hadn't happened before. And he got everyone to wash their hands, and he massively reduced deaths of these pregnant women. And the reason why it was different between the doctor-led unit and the midwife-led unit was that the midwives weren't doing autopsies, so they weren't coming into contact with that kind of dead matter. But he was taken very unseriously at the time, despite these amazing results, because the doctors really looked down on him, saying, how dare you say that we are causing these women to die? Like, how dare you? And this theory is rubbish. And very sadly, he died a very early death. He kind of went mad because he was unheard, treated like a fool, even though he saved lots of women's lives. And he died in prison. He got beaten by a guard and probably died of an infection from his wound. So ironically died of sepsis, despite saving all these women's lives from sepsis. And it wasn't that long afterwards that germ theory was discovered, and people realized washing hands is really important and hygiene is important. So he was kind of ignored in his lifetime, but since his death, a lot has been made of him. And I kind of was really shocked when I read about him, because I'd never heard of him in my medical training. And, his findings are the basis of so much that is important in medicine. And just by pure chance, as I was researching it, there was a play on in the West End, which is about him. So I went to see it, and it just made the whole experience obviously much fuller for me to kind of see how they portrayed it. And very movingly, at a lot of times in the book, they had a lot of the women coming on stage as ghosts in the background of all the women that weren't saved. And I found it really, really moving. And it's not just that he was unheard as a doctor at the time. It was also the fact that all these women who were dying, all these pregnant women, their needs had been unheard as well and not taken seriously. So I thought it would be a powerful story to add to the book.
It really is, and through that lens, the freedom that you get within theatre, like you said, they're the ghosts. You just, I think it's so much more powerful. It's an alternate way of telling that story, which is wonderful, and will change an interpretation of it, as opposed to someone might just read that and kind of remember it and think, oh, that's shocking, but then move on to something else. Whereas that stuff stays with you. That visual medium has a way of really speaking to the soul sometimes.
Yeah, and as I said, for me, it was reminding myself this is actually about the woman. His story is very sad. It's very sad that happened to him, but yeah, actually thousands of women died. It's their story just as much. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. To me, that makes me think of the qualitative research, and that I've always seen great power in human storytelling, in conversation, in the way that people express themselves. I recently worked with a client who was a designer and was sort of looking for a way to rejuvenate her emotional creativity, which is the stuff I term that we do just because we've got something to express, rather than the intellectual stuff we might do in our day job. And she was very open and shared with me some poetry that she'd written about when her brother was going through some mental health difficulties, and it was incredibly moving and really great stuff. But she had no real intention of taking that anywhere else other than this personal thing she created. But I'm a big believer in, when you engage with the arts in that way, it doesn't need to be public and front facing. I think it just shifts the way you see the world a little, and I think that we could all benefit from that, and particularly in intellectual fields. And I have to believe that can play a role in hearing people on a deeper level.
I completely agree with what you said. And I think, yeah, often I think in this world where there's so much on social media and you're kind of encouraged to share things, actually choosing what you share is really important. And I shared some personal stuff in my book, but it was things that I had talked about before, so I felt quite comfortable sharing it. And now when I'm interviewed, I'm very happy to talk about the stuff in the book, but I've thought quite deeply about what I don't want to share, and that for me is part of also listening to yourself as well. I talk a little bit about that in the book. That actually, in a lot of ways, we need to be reflective about our own listening practice and really understand, when do we find listening hard? Where are our blind spots? When could we actually just do with shutting up sometimes and letting other people speak? Who don't we believe? But actually listening to yourself is part of that. And, working out when, you're not listening well, perhaps because you're really knackered and you should just take a break, is a really important thing to do.
It really is. And also in this too much world, the speed of it all and the information overload, I feel that too many of us spending too much time in our conscious brain, always transfixed on the A to B and the next task. And, we all do it. It's the way, the lives we kind of have to live in this system. But I'm a massive advocate for just idling and leisure time. And even if it's staring at a wall or, it doesn't have to be anything, a task. I think there's just something about disengaging and letting your unconscious do its work, because that's where we talked about instinct earlier, that's where those connections are often made and those solutions are handed to us, because we've put all that stuff into our mind. But if it doesn't have the time to let the cogs turn, we don't get those beautiful solutions.
Absolutely. I was just thinking, you're asking about my childhood, and I can remember being quite bored a lot in India. Sometimes when my cousins were busy and I'm just being very bored and thinking, when was the last time I was bored? And I was actually a little bit bored last weekend because my husband was away, and I think I didn't want to do any housework or anything. So I was a little bit bored. I thought, this is good. It's really good to be bored. But I also remember I used to go running regularly, which I don't anymore. But it's amazing how many solutions your mind comes up with when you're running, when you're not thinking about anything. You're just trying to literally put your next foot forward and just get through. How your mind, your subconscious just comes up with those thoughts. It's incredible.
Yeah, it really is. Yeah. And I talked to a guy recently who used to work in the innovation at Disney, and he terms it as the river of thinking. When we get caught up in the kind of, the established way of thinking, whether that's in his case at Disney, but for other people, like we said, about not listening, about just spending too much time with people who are perhaps like us, or, the established person, and not bringing in a broader sphere of influence and listening to other people. I think people are complex, so you really have to try to step out of that.
Yeah, and it's about being open, isn't it? And just thinking, I'm going to listen and try and listen without judgment. And I talk about it a bit in the book. So some people ask me, if you are saying you have to listen to your patients, to everything they say, does that mean you have to do what they say? And I say, no, you have to listen and, respect their viewpoint. And you may not agree, but it's about making them feel heard and then explaining, why this may not be the right route for them, and keeping the door open so that you can have an ongoing conversation about it. So yeah, I think, that kind of humility, listening without judgment is really, really important to hear other viewpoints.
Yes, absolutely. And that respect thing is really important. And I tell a story in my first book, and it's about you mentioned mischief. I was quite mischievous as a kid. I was never bad, but I liked to use my artistic ability. I'd draw teachers in quite offensive ways at school to make friends laugh and the likes. And I remember the story I tell where one of my friends took the drawing off me and he put it through said teacher's window, and it sat on the inside of this windowsill for 2 weeks. And I was a nervous wreck every time I walked past it, thinking, please, a cleaner find it and do the right thing, get rid of it. It wasn't the case. The teacher found it. He called us all in. He quickly he looked at my art GCSE work, saw it was okay, and kind of went, right, okay, I know this one was you. But what he did very cleverly, and I think this is another form of listening, was instead of banging me to rights, he kind of left me hanging for 2 weeks, which I think was very cleverly his way of punishing me. And then when he did call me in, he said, we'll call it quits if you can design me a poster for a talk I've got coming up on dyslexia at the school. And I didn't get it at the time. I was shocked and kind of delighted and thought, yeah, okay, yeah, that sounds fun. It's not really a punishment, but I look back and I know exactly what he was doing. He was listening to what it was I was trying to say by doing this mischief and just diverting it a little bit. And, like you say, you don't have to take everything as a command, and there is a necessary need for hierarchy. But, he respected me in that moment, and that was actually a really pivotal moment in me kind of tapping into my artistic ability and doing something a little less mischievous with it.
That is a wonderful story. Like, what? Yeah, he sounds very clever. And as you say, the punishment is in waiting, isn't it? Because you don't know what's going to happen.
Yeah. And, in the same conversation, he told me it was on the fridge at home because his wife found it so funny. There's a little victory in that. Oh, well, I just wanted to say thank you for writing this book, because I think it's really important, and but I hope it was a very enjoyable experience for you, because that certainly resonated to me in the book.
Oh, thank you for saying that. I really loved it, actually. And I started writing it when I took a year out of clinical medicine to do a master's. And then when I came back in, I was like, can I put into practice the stuff that I've said? And I found it difficult, and that kind of added to what I wrote in the book, like, how can we make this realistic? But having an outlet for me to really reflect on what I was seeing every day was really important, and then to kind of pour it into the writing. Yeah, I really loved it. And I think that's probably what I miss most, is actually the writing and the researching in the book.
Ah, fantastic. And you're still doing the writing group?
Yes, we're still doing the writing group, and, hopefully I'll do some writing again soon.
Nice. Well, it gives me, seeing that level of creativity and important work like yours and like Yasmin's, it's just, it's why I got into this industry, and, it fills me with optimism in a world where it's too easy to feel pessimism. So yeah, it's, I love it. I'll be putting it on the list. I have a reading list on the Creative Condition website. It's quite broad, and I like to kind of go far and wide, and yours will certainly be on there. So yeah, thanks again. And I appreciate you taking the time to chat.
Thank you. I really enjoyed it. Thanks for the invite.
I hope you guys enjoyed the warmth of Rageshri. She was a truly wonderful, lovely person. Such a joy to spend time with. I hope you took a lot from that, getting into the topic of listening. I think it's so overlooked in today's world, this 1,000 miles an hour world that we live in. And we're all so busy, myself included, with families and with business and with changing economies and all the troubles that are out there. It's very hard to give all of our attention to the things that deserve it the most. But that, I think, we must do, particularly for creativity. I think it's fundamental. I really do, and I'm interested in your thoughts. So if you want to hit me up, do so, please, ben@bentalon.com. You can also message me on LinkedIn. I'll respond reasonably quick there. That's my primary social media channel these days. A lot of talk about Adolescence, the TV show at the moment. I'm interested in your thoughts on that, because young people and purpose and creativity, as you will know if you've been listening to the show for a long time, is a really big cause of mine. And I haven't yet watched it, but I fully intend to, even if it is going to make me feel miserable, which I've been warned about. But I've been signing petitions, not petitions, but I've been contacting my kids' school. They're only 5, but we're already having conversations in groups of parents about combating the, smartphones and social media and the damage it's doing to young people. And there's already a generation that have been completely wrecked because of it. Read The Anxious Generation by Jonathan Haidt if you want the scoop on that. It's a brilliant book. Also, Richard Louve's work, he talks about the importance of kids being outdoors and restoring that relationship with nature. It's a really important work that he's doing. But it's a topic that fascinates and alarms me, if I'm honest. I see it with kids of friends. I see it all around, walking past people, groups of people with heads down, sitting on benches, just lost in their phones, and it's quite dystopian. in a lot of ways. Anyway, bit of a tangent there. Massive thank you to the founding sponsor of the show, illustrationx.com, who I can't thank enough for being here since day one. Go and check out their global range of illustration and animation portfolios now over at illustrationx.com. Great agency, doing a lot to support the industry too. Let me know how you've been, Ben at bentalon.com. Always up for pitches for the show. Always want to know what you've been up to too. So get in touch. And it is the last week to get the Pit Stop one-to-one intensive coaching session where we go through all of your creativity's makeup and look to get you back on your optimum path. Let me know if that's of interest. I've been talking to some agencies about working with their staff on that. So again, if you're listening and you're with an agency, get in touch. I'd love to help you. I'd love to come and do the workshop or look at something longer term or maybe both. It's always good to kick off with a workshop and go from there. So thanks for listening, guys. Do rate, review, subscribe, and most importantly, please tell somebody about the show if you enjoyed it. I love doing it. I'll be here for a while. thecreativecondition.com for all the other resources. Have a great week. Take care. Stay creative.